Yes, guys, welcome back to another episode of Teams Like Brighton. And today's episode is all about the opposition. And joining me is none other than George Smith. You might have remembered him from last season. He's the MEN's Manchester United reporter. George, how you doing?
I'm very well, Tom. How about you?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. Not too bad. I'm glad to see the end of the international break for sure. With European football just around the corner as well, it's building up quite exciting over here. We're not really used to it as much as the city of Manchester is with European football for sure. But let's talk ahead about this game. It's fair to say it's quite a big one going in here. It's a bit mad to say that it's top two top six sides at Old Trafford. Safe to say there's quite a lot that's happened at Manchester United off the pitch as well as on the pitch. We'll talk about that more later. But let's go ahead straight in for the match. Team news. What's the latest for Ten Hag's side?
Well, Eric Ten Hag will be doing his press conference in a couple of hours' time after we've done this podcast. But the way things are shaping up at the moment is obviously Jadon Sancho won't be included in the squad, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in depth, aren't we, later on. Anthony's also going to be absent, so immediately two big name wingers out for United on Saturday afternoon. Sofian Amrabat could make his debut by all accounts. It looks as though he's shaken off his minor injury problem, so could be included. Mason Mount seems a little bit touch and go before we know what Eric Ten Hag is going to say in his press conference. And then the other one is Sergio Reguilon, who signed on loan from Tottenham on deadline day. He could make his debut. He's fit and raring to go. And probably all eyes as well be on Rasmus Højlund, who stepped off the bench to make his debut at Arsenal prior to the international break, and he's fit and raring to go to possibly make his first start. So that's kind of where the headlines are at for United in terms of team news. So it'll be a case of starts on the right wing and will Højlund get his full debut. I think they're the main takeaways that the fans will be looking for when the team news drops at 2 o'clock on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, let's talk about United's form because it's safe to say it's not been the most consistent start for Ten Hag's sides. Both defeats away from home and narrow victories against teams really on paper United should have dominated. Where do you think United's flaws have been so far this season?
Well, I would argue that they've simply not looked sharp enough, not looked fit enough. They've tired quite quickly, and as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I've been on annual leave recently, so I've seen three of their opening four games. And the opening game against Wolves, where they scraped a 1-0 win on the Monday Night Football, the first Monday Night Football of the season, they were very, very poor. They were very fortunate to win that game. It was a case of Wolves just simply weren't clinical enough, and had they brought their shooting boots to Old Trafford that night, Wolves could have comfortably won that game 2 or 3-0. They were really, really good. United were off the pace and almost looked incredibly lethargic, as though they were at the end of a long season, not at the beginning of a new one. The following week, Tottenham away, first half performance was okay. There was some nice bits to it, but again, same old story, not clinical enough in front of goal. Then in the second half, Spurs got the early goal. They collapsed like they so often do away from home. Against the so-called big hitters in this league, as we saw last season when they were trounced by the likes of Man City and Liverpool away, Arsenal. I mean, they were crushed by Newcastle, even though they only lost 2-0 last season. So it was a similar story at Spurs. Then they had Nottingham Forest at home. They scraped past them, coming from 2-0 down to win 3-2 after a nightmare start. Again, seemingly was it a case of underestimating the opposition, and they were caught out and 2-0 down after 4 minutes, but came back, as they so often do, to win that game. They are very good at home, as we've seen over the last 12 months. And then obviously they went to Arsenal, and for a few seconds, it looked as though they were going to win that game. Obviously that debatable offside Alejandro Garnacho goal. Then obviously Arsenal scored twice in stoppage time to win the game 3-1. So in a nutshell, their form's sort of carried on in a similar way to last season, in the sense that they've got the results at home, but they're really, really poor away from home. And obviously, you've got to accept United. They've had two very challenging away games to start the season, Arsenal and Tottenham. You're not going to get arguably too many tougher than that, certainly back to back. At home, though, Wolves, Forest, they should have been winning those games comfortably. And though they did, the performances certainly, for the most part against Wolves, it just wasn't there. So it is a big game, this one, this weekend. And there's a sense that obviously after all what's gone off in the last couple of weeks with Jadon Sancho and a few other nuggets in there, it's a big game for United and one that they've got to win. They've got to put a performance on for the fan. They've got to try and lift some of the doom and gloom. But having said that, they're in for arguably one of the toughest tests they could wish for with the way Brighton have started the season.
Right. So We mentioned there quite a lot there. There was a lot there to digest. Obviously, the Arsenal game was quite a big one for United as well. Decisions really seem to be going their way. From what you've seen in the first 4 games, where do you United finish it come the end of the season?
Well, I think they've got to, at the very least, be targeting another top four tilt. There's no doubt about that. There has been talk of a title charge. Personally, I don't subscribe to that. I really don't think United have got the quality, certainly in terms of strength and depth, to compete with the likes of City and Arsenal at the moment. The starting 11 is not on par with either of those two. So when you dive a little deeper into the squad, they've certainly not got the depth to compete. So I think the objective again will be trying to get a top four finish. Can they get more points than what bagged them third last season? Can they improve on third and possibly claim second? So I think anything other than a top four finish is a failure this season. I think they'll be looking to compete as well on the trophy front in the FA Cup and the League Cup again. They obviously made the final of both competitions last season. Champions League, it's going to be very tough for them. Obviously, Bayern Munich coming up in their first group game on Wednesday, which is going to be a real tough test of their credentials. So I think realistically, the ultimate aim has got to be top four again, and then just gradually build year on year. Because Eric Ten Hag, he's overseeing this long-term vision. And though United did spend a fair amount of money in the summer, again, he didn't necessarily land his preferred targets. Obviously, it was well documented. He wanted Harry Kane to lead that forward line. It didn't happen. He wanted Jude Bellingham and Frankie de Jong, either of those two, to bolster that midfield. He ended up with Mason Mount. So though they've spent money, he's not necessarily got the top end elite level players that he wanted. So until that changes, I don't think United will be in a title conversation. So again, I fear it's going to be top four or bust for them this season.
It's quite interesting what you're saying about the signings. What do you think went wrong for United? Because personally, for me, it all seemed like a sure thing that Kane was going to be going. Bellingham might have been a stretch, but De Jong also was a long-term target of United. So what's gone wrong for Hag to get the players that he wanted?
I think with the Harry Kane situation, first of all, I think it was a case of, number one, Daniel Levy at Tottenham Hotspur was never going to entertain the idea of selling to a Premier League rival. We know what Daniel Levy's like. He's a stickler when it comes to negotiations, particularly with fellow big Premier League clubs. And I just don't think there was any way on God's earth that he was going to sell Harry Kane to a direct rival. Spurs obviously wanting top four this season as well. They want to return to the Champions League. So I think the only way Harry Kane was going to leave the summer just gone was by going to a club overseas, and obviously that's what happened with going to Bayern Munich. In regards to De Jong and Bellingham, we did a story back in December last year where Eric Ten Hag essentially told sources that Jude Bellingham was basically that if he could sign any player in the world, it would be him, which is quite understandable with the way we've seen Jude Bellingham develop over the past couple of years or so. And then De Jong, United tried to get that done in the summer of 22. United did reach an agreement with Barcelona that summer, but Barcelona ended up having to back out of the deal due to De Jong being owed unpaid wages of about 17 million euros. So again, that was another one that didn't materialise. So he's missed out on leading targets. There's no doubt about that. And you can understand the manager's frustration, even though fans of other clubs will always look at Manchester United and rightly point out they do spend money and big money on players. I mean, they spent best part of £60 million on Mason Mount, 72 million on Rasmus Højlund. It is big money that fans of only other clubs could dream of. But necessarily the manager, though he's pleased with the additions of Mount and Højlund, he's not landed his number one top concrete target. So that's where it's gone wrong for United. But obviously there's all the feud going on with the ownership and issues there. But they are continuing to spend money, but not necessarily the Glazers' own money. It's all through merchandise sales, ticket sales, and every other nut and cranny that comes with Manchester United with the profit they bring in every year. So that's where we're at recruitment-wise. But yeah, Harry Kane, I just think it was a case of Spurs were never going to entertain the idea of selling him to a Premier League rival.
And you mentioned them just then in that conversation, the Glazers. What is the latest on United being up for sale? Are they up for sale? Were they ever going to be sold? Was this just something that the Glazers were just messing about with?
Well, I mean, where we can start with this conversation? I mean, over at the NBN, I think we've just about had enough of covering this, and basically nothing's happened for the best part of 4 or 5 months now. It's been a real slow process. The Glazers announced that they were putting the club up for sale or seeking fresh investment. I remember it well. It was the third day of the World Cup last year, so we're not far off a year since they released that first statement confirming that they were open to offers. Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Sheikh Jassim from Qatar have long been since the two favourites to potentially get the club. Ratcliffe wants a majority stake. Sheikh Jassim wants full control. He wants to buy the club outright. And ultimately, there's just been no movement on that. I don't think we've had a concrete development since about the third week of June when Sheikh Jassim tabled. I think it was a fifth and yet another improved bid, and nothing's moved on since there. So just a lot of frustration. The fans they just want it wrapped up one way or another, and ultimately we are no closer to knowing whether the Glazers are going to stay or go.
Yeah, it's plenty to talk about, and there's plenty more that we could talk about what's going on at Old Trafford, the Glazers, and United all together. But let's look ahead more about the match. And obviously, you guys are going to be entertaining Brighton, who have a pretty decent start to the season after finishing in the top 6 last season. What are your thoughts on the club as a whole, and what are you expecting to see from the Albion?
Well, I think it'll be a really tough test. There's no doubt about that. I've been very impressed by the start Brighton have made. Obviously, they've won 3 of their first 4. They're the top scorers in the league so far with 12 goals across those 4 games. They dismantled Newcastle. They took Wolves and Luton apart, and obviously came unstuck against West Ham in that home game in the 3rd week of the season. But Brighton have just got an embarrassment of riches now, particularly in forward areas. You look at the likes of Solly March, who's had an excellent start to the season, Matoma, Evan Ferguson, and Ansu Fati's obviously coming on loan from Barcelona. And you do have to look at that team, and you do have to take it seriously now. It's as simple as that. This is a very, very good Brighton team that play a very, very good brand of football. And United have proven in those 2 games against Wolves and Nottingham Forest, even though they did win both of them, that they can be vulnerable at home in certainly defensive aspects, even though they've won those first 2 games and haven't lost at home in the league since Brighton beat them on the opening day of last season. So there's a long unbeaten record there at Old Trafford that dates back over 12 months now. But Brighton have proven this season that they're not to be messed with. They've got an embarrassment of riches in forward areas, I've just said. So I think Brighton will go into that game with the intention of winning it. I think they've got the quality to win it. And I think for United, though the onus will be on them to attack, and they're going to be under a little bit of pressure after all the noises that have been made in the last couple of weeks and the negativity surrounding the club, this one isn't going to be easy. And United certainly can't underestimate them. But I think United will be looking at this upcoming period and think, we've played Arsenal and Tottenham in the first 4. Our next 4 games look certainly favourable on paper. 3 of them are at home. The only away game is Burnley. It's a good opportunity to get points on the board. But obviously, they've got that big game against Bayern to come in the week. So they've got to get a result from this. So I think United will look at it in the sense that it's one we've got to win. But I think they'll be very mindful that this is going to be a very, very, very stern test.
And obviously, is the game just before the European campaigns kick off for the respective clubs. From your experience, what do you think that Brighton fans can expect from Europe? What things will they probably have to deal with, especially in terms of sort of testing squad depth? I think if I remember rightly, we don't have a week's break now until the new year, which seems very alien to us. So what can Brighton fans expect from that in terms of testing the squad?
Well, speaking from the past experience of Manchester United last season with the Europa League, and obviously they went all the way to the final of the League Cup and won that. So they went a long, long, long time without a midweek break, which is what was coming up for Brighton. Obviously, the World Cup last season was, messed the fixture list up that little bit more. But I think Brighton are going to have to be mindful of the fact that there's going to be a lot of rotation to come from Roberto De Zerbi in the coming weeks. Obviously, you've got the problem of going basically every week now, Thursday, Sunday. And it was a problem for United last season because Eric Ten Hag, as I said earlier on, he's not necessarily got the squad depth, certainly at a level that Manchester United should be expecting. So he very often refrained to rotate things. He often deployed star-studded 11s against teams where you would have presumed that he'd made a few more changes and possibly played the youngsters, because United, obviously, last season, they played some of the European minnows, such as Sheriff Tiraspol, for example. They were in their Europa League group. And then United, obviously, they finished second in their group, so they then had to play a Europa League 2-legged playoff to get into the last 16, which was obviously against Barcelona. So that meant another 2 fixtures. So it's going to be hectic for Brighton, particularly if they progress well in the domestic cup competitions as well. But at the end of the day, I suppose if you get into these competitions, surely you want to progress in them. And I mean, for a club like Brighton, who have obviously been on the rise in the last few years, and they've now got this opportunity, they're going to want to make the very, very most of it. But like I said, I think Brighton have got good depth. They've got a lot of quality in forward areas. They've got the ability to mix things up. So I suppose it'll be a sort of a case of, what does Roberto De Zerbi consider more important? Is it the Premier League, or is it perhaps going on a bit of a European journey, which I'm sure the fans would love and embrace? So I don't know about you, Tom, but what personally, from your perspective, do you think De Zerbi will sort of maybe lean towards in being his favoured path?
Sorry, say that again. You broke up a little bit.
I was just sort of saying, do you think De Zerbi will perhaps lean maybe towards the league, or maybe the Europa League, or just try and balance the two
Ooh.
the best he can?
It's funny you say that, because when Dunk was being interviewed at the start of the season, he got asked about the Europa League, and he just said, we want to win it. So for me, I see with De Zerbi, he just wants to just do as best he possibly can for the squad for the rest of the season. I think he will definitely put a few more eggs in the basket in the Europa League, just to see how far this club can really go in there. Because if we get a good promising run and we find ourselves in the mix in the finals or the semi-finals, then the two precious words Champions League is going to be whispering on the South Coast, which is just unimaginable. I still remember the days of us losing to 9-man Walsall at the Withdean. So it does seem a bit bonkers, the fact that there is a possibility that we can realistically talk about not finishing in top four, but we could be winning a European competition here. When you look at our group, Ajax and Marseille are on paper the two biggest guys there on paper, but Ajax are in a transition at the moment. They've lost Kudus to West Ham, who could have come to us, but we won't talk about that. They haven't really recovered since Ten Hag. They've sacked two managers in that time last season, in Heitner and Schroeder. They just haven't really found that much of an answer. Feyenoord are probably the more concrete team in from the Eredivisie in that case. And Marseille as well, they've lost quite a fair few players in the summer. So they haven't really found their feet at the moment in Ligue 1 this season. So there's a lot there that De Zerbi is going to be seeing, like, we can take this on. We can win this group here. We need to push on. So I think now that we've got the shrewd signings of, like, Ansu Fati and Carlos Baleba, I do see De Zerbi maybe pushing more favourably for Europa League matches and maybe just doing damage control in the league, perhaps. I honestly can't see us finishing top six. I'll be amazed if we get top six, just because no midweek breaks, Thursday Sunday. It's a big thing, and De Zerbi said last season that we aren't ready for it, and I agree with him then, and I still agree with him now. So I think if we are going to do anything this season, I think Europa League will be the priority, which is mad thinking about it, really.
Yeah, it's been quite the rise for you guys, hasn't it? It's really impressive, and I think one of the nice things about it is that it's admired so much around this country in terms of football fans in general. I think there's a lot of appreciation for what Brighton have done, similarly to what Brentford have done as well. I think a lot of people look back and sort of admire it, and I think you learn a lot of friends and a lot of neutral supporters this season in Europe. I really do.
Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting one for sure, and it's gonna be so alien, the fact that Marseille, Amsterdam, and Athens are on my away day wish list, as well as Manchester and the few London clubs, and going up to Newcastle typically this season. It is mental. But George, I want to say thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, but I am going to have to ask you, as is tradition, what do you think the score is going to be ahead of this weekend's match?
Well, you put me on the spot, as you so often do, Tom, and I've got to be honest with what I've seen of United so far this season and what's gone off in the last few weeks. I genuinely don't know what sort of United side we're going to get. We're either going to get one that stumbled and stuttered like it did against Wolves and Forest, or we're going to get one that's going to come out all guns blazing and had a bit of a rocket up the backside after a bad few weeks. But I think with the way things are going, I can actually see Brighton winning this game. I really can. I think United obviously have been very, very good at Old Trafford. It is more than 12 months, as I said, since they lost there in all competitions. Real Sociedad were the last team to beat them in the Europa League last year. Brighton, the last domestic team. So it would be it would fit the narrative somewhat if Brighton were to end that unbeaten run and, force United to start another one. So I could see the Seagulls winning this one, and I'm going to go for a 2-1 Brighton win, which would be quite damaging for United. I've just actually seen a stat earlier on this morning that if United were to lose this game, it'd be the first time they'd lost 3 of their opening 5 league games since 1990. So there's a bit of pressure for United, and you never know, Brighton might capitalise that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do agree with you on that as well. I do feel like Brighton will go there, and I think we've got a great chance to win. I think the scoreline's going to be 2-1 as well. We're a bit shaky in defence because we do push on a little bit more, that little bit more up front with what we have at our disposal, particularly on our bench as well. And Deserby's been very attacking minded in substitutions as well, which has been exciting to see at the start of the season. It'll be interesting to see whether or not he maintains that as we go into the fixture congestion period here, which is typically something that I see Jurgen Klopp moan and whinge about. But it'd be interesting to see what De Zerbi says come December time for sure. But look, George, thank you so much again. Just give us a shout out where we can follow you for all things Manchester United.
You can follow me on X as it is now. And I nearly said Twitter then, but it's underscore George Smith 99, where you can find my United content and obviously the MEN website as well.
Excellent. X is weird. X is like saying the artist formerly known as Prince. It's still known as Prince. So therefore, to me, it's still Twitter. But look, George, thank you so much again. As always, guys, make sure to like, subscribe on all your podcast platforms, however you listen, and make sure to like and subscribe on our YouTube channel, Teams Like Brighton as well. Until then, guys, up the Albion. And for those going, enjoy the trip to Old Trafford as well.